So, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kar Wei. I'm the founder and CTO of Hexcore Labs. So, we are a cybersecurity and AI training company. And today, I'm going to do a live demonstration on ethical hacking. Right, so as I'm talking, please feel free to connect with me here in this QR code. So some background about me is that I'm a CREST and OSCP certified penetration tester. So penetration testers are basically a technical term for ethical hackers. Right, so I specialize in building curriculums, especially for adult cybersecurity training. And that led me to start my own training company called Hexcore Labs, where I mainly oversee vulnerability research and development. So my day-to-day include testing new vulnerable environments and also writing exploit scripts for this practical lab creation for my learners. So today I'm going to talk about a few things, particularly practical ethical hacking. So I'm going to go through a few common asset types, and then I'm going to introduce all of you to the ethical hacking process. And then finally, we'll have a live demonstration on the WordPress 4.6 target. Okay, so let's talk about common asset types. So what is the importance of an asset type? It's basically what your target is running. So this will affect the methodology and the tools that you use when you're trying to gain unauthorized access into this target. So some common asset types that we have is firstly servers. So this can be your remote servers or web servers that is hosting some service remotely. We also have web applications. So these are your web pages, your WordPress, your CMS systems that is hosted on these servers. And then lastly, you have other specialized asset types like your cloud services, your OT systems, like your SCADA systems, and even more hardware IoT devices. So depending on what your target is running, the ethical hacking process and the tools you use is going to change slightly. So let me start with a scenario, right? Imagine you are a burglar and you are trying to gain access into an apartment, right? So as a burglar, right, you first find ways to get to know how to gain access into this apartment, especially unauthorized access. So this can be through your front door, your windows, or even your back door. So the thing here is that you can think of this apartment as your target. As an ethical hacker, your goal here is to gain unauthorized access into your target, right? In order to do something. So the most common thing that an ethical hacker or like a non-ethical hacker will want to do, right, is to exfiltrate data or like do some damage. So this analogy can be applied very well with the ethical hacking process. So another term for the ethical hacking process is the penetration testing phases. So it's split into a few different phases. Firstly, you have information gathering. So for the analogy, it is equivalent to determining who your target is and what level or what's the apartment number that they're living on. And for server pen testing, it will be the equivalent of gathering your network address, your IP address, or any associated domains or listening ports on the target. And then after you have completed your information gathering stage, we have your enumeration stage. That's where you find more specific information like your service versions, your plugins, and also do your vulnerability assessment. So for the analogy, this would be identifying potential ways to enter this apartment. For example, going through your front door or going through your windows or even a back door. And then after that, once we have identified a potential vulnerability, we'll move on to exploitation, where we attempt to exploit this vulnerability to gain unauthorized access. So for the analogy, this can be equivalent to, let's say you choose the windows as your entering method, right? Then you likely break into the windows and then gain access to your apartment. And then finally, we end off with post-exploitation, where once you are able to access this target, what do you want to do? Do you want to do your actions on objectives, which is maybe data exfiltration? Do you want to elevate your privileges or even hide your tracks? So in the case of this analogy, it would be maybe hiding your tracks by closing the windows and staying stealthy so that nobody will know that you are even in the apartment in the first place. So let's talk a bit about our target today. So I chose this WordPress 4.6 target because it is a very popular content management system used worldwide. So currently over 40% of websites on the internet is powered by WordPress. And the specific vulnerability that we're going to look today is CVE 216100033. So this is targeting a very specific library called the PHP mailer library that was distributed with all default WordPress 4.6 distributions. So this vulnerability has a CVSS score of 9.8 critical. So CVSS scoring is something that we use to determine the severity of vulnerabilities from 1 to 10. So the higher your scoring is, the more severe your vulnerabilities are. So as you can see here, it has 9.8 critical, which makes it a critical level vulnerability because it gives us what we call remote code execution, RCE, which is basically being able to run arbitrary commands on a target that you're not supposed to. And for this demo, I'll be using our training range, Hexcore Arena, where we host remote vulnerable environments on the cloud so that our learners can access it and then practice their practical cybersecurity skills. So other environments that we also host is cloud security, mobile security, and also AI automation workflows. Okay, so let's look at the demo. So with me here, I have my Kali machine. So this is a Linux terminal, right? A terminal is where I can enter commands in order to control my current machine and do more complex actions as opposed to using a graphical user interface. So right now, I am connected to my network through a VPN, and I'm going to start my target here, which is this WordPress 4.6 machine. So this is going to give me an IP address to access this target, which let me just confirm that it is running. Okay, so now that I have at least an address of the target that I want to exploit, right? Going back to the ethical hacking process, I will first start with information gathering. So for every target on every host, be it your laptops, your mobile phones, your tablets, you all have 65,535 ports that you can potentially exploit. So the first step would be to run a port scan so that you'll be able to determine what is running on this target. Okay, so just now when I was testing this, a port scan on all ports seems to be a bit slow, so I'm going to skip that and do a more focused port scan for now. So what I'm using here is called Nmap. It is one of the most popular port scanner and service scans. And right here, I can see that there is port 80 and port 3306 listening on this target. So port 80 is typically used for web servers, whereas 3306 is typically used for MySQL databases. And if I will want to do a more targeted scan to get the exact versions, I can pass my -s capital V flag. So this stands for service version. It's a versioning scan. So it's going to give me a bit more information like the version of the HTTP server and also the version of the database. So now I've finished I have completed a segment of my information gathering stage. I have a better idea of what my target is running, right? Then this brings me to my enumeration stage, where I want to get a more closer idea of what exactly is this HTTP server running. So the most straightforward way to do it, especially if you have a HTTP server, is to just use your browser, right? And then just see what is running over here. So I can see a very bare bones WordPress site, right? This is the base template that you get when you first set up your WordPress site. And now this gives me a very good starting point to just do some initial vulnerability assessment on what this target or potential vulnerabilities I can exploit. So for WordPress, we have this very good WordPress security scanner called WP Scan that I can pass it to complete the next step of my enumeration phase. So this scanner is specifically designed to scan WordPress sites. So it comes up with more specific information like your WordPress version, potential plugins that it is installed onto the system. Oh, sorry, wrong IP address. And even the themes that are used on this target. So it's going to take quite a quick scan here because this WordPress site isn't really running a lot of things, right? But there's going to be quite a bit of jargon here. So the nice thing about this is that it's not going to tell us what specific vulnerability it has, but it will give us a very good overview of the different dependencies that this web app is running. So for example, I can see that, okay, the web server is Apache, it's running 2.4.7 version. It's also using PHP underlying, which is 5.5.9. And it was also able to find potential interesting files that I might want to look at as a penetration tester. And also my WordPress version and the themes that are being used in this WordPress site. So now as an attacker, I have more information to work with. So in this stage, the enumeration stage is actually the most time-consuming stage because as an attacker, right, we are blind. We don't know which one is the real vulnerability. So usually we'll spend a lot of time trying every single one of this and hope that something works. So let's say I went through that enumeration stage and I've identified that, okay, this looks like the most promising section of this target, WordPress version 4.6. So that's where I can use this keyword to just start doing my vulnerability assessment. And for this, I can use a separate tool called SearchSploit. So this is an exploit database that is hosted online, right, which allows you to search for existing exploit scripts targeting specific CVEs and vulnerabilities. So what I'm going to do at the site here on the right is to just pass these keywords that I found on my target. And it's going to show me a lot of relevant exploit scripts that has these keywords like WordPress and 4.6. So as an attacker, I'll need to enumerate through all these different options. And let's say I identified something that seems very promising. It targets a specific version that I want, right? WordPress 4.6, remote code execution. So that's when, okay, interesting. Let me just save it to my current directory using its exploit ID. And open it up. So something that I like to tell my learners is that anything they download on the internet, right, you have to open it and at least do some initial assessment because you never know what's on the internet. Even if it's hosted on a seemingly safe exploit database, there might be some other attacker that's trying to target you. So what I always ask them to do is to just do a very quick read-through of what this script is doing. So this is quite technical, so I'm going to just summarize what this script is doing. Firstly, it is doing a reverse shell back to my attacker so that I'll be able to get interactive shell if this exploit script works. Afterwards, it is targeting or it is opening up a listening port on 1337 on my attacker machine to catch this shell and then serving it on a web server run by Python. And then after that, it's using a vulnerability that is within this user underscore login host header to shift my payload over to the target and then run it on the target. And if everything works correctly, the target will connect back to my machine on port 1337. And this command here is where I run my listener to return the shell to. So as a start, I'm going to tell this exploit script where my attacker is located so it knows where to send my reverse shell back to. Right? So my attacker's IP address is 10.0.8.1. So I'm going to edit that part first. And then I'm going to just try my first try of running this exploit script. So they're going to ask me, oh, do I want to get a shell? Of course. It's the whole reason why I'm doing this. Okay, so there are a few things happening here, right? So it just executed the list of features that I just explained just now, but something is wrong. It's not returning an interactive shell. Why? Okay, so a huge part of penetration testing or ethical hacking also centers around troubleshooting. And that's actually where a lot of learners or people who are technical practitioners fail at, is that they just think that, okay, cybersecurity on the entry level is just like you point, shoot, and then you get it. But oftentimes it's not like that. You have to do a lot of debugging. You have to be able to know how to read your exploit scripts and especially your error messages. So over here, there are a few things that are happening here. Particularly, it seems like my listener is failing. So for a real penetration testing exercise, they will probably spend a lot of time fixing this error. But let's say because this is a short demonstration, I'm going to skip it. So there is actually an error here on my Python web server. There is a Python version mismatch where it's running Python 2, but I have Python 3 installed on my machine. So I'm going to change that to the correct version. And on my listener, it is also actually missing a flag, very important flag P, just to tell my attacker machine that this 1337 is a port and not a host, because it's seeing it as a host, and that's why it's failing. So let me just do those editing, right, and just run my script again. So after a while, you can see that there's a lot more things happening here. So firstly, I fixed my web server, right? And now you can see there is a successful HTTP request for my rc.txt, which is my payload, which means that my payload successfully got transferred over to the target. And then finally, when the target executes my payload, it returns me with a reverse shell, and it gives me unauthorized access and remote code execution onto the target. And this is a very simple exploitation demonstration on this WordPress 4.6 vulnerability. So let me just go back to my slides. So just to recap what I did, firstly, I enumerated this target, right, using WP scan because it is running WordPress. And then after that, I found an exploit script for 2016-10033. And then because the exploit script is not really working at the start, I went to troubleshoot it and edit it. And then finally, when I execute it, it successfully gave me a remote shell back on my attacker machine. So what you have seen here is the full, or maybe 3/4 of the whole ethical hacking process, starting from information gathering, where I first did my port scan, and then I went to enumeration, where I used WP scan and search exploit to gather more information and do vulnerability assessment. And then finally, I did my exploitation, which is I fixed my exploit script, and then I launched it, and then got a shell. So here's an overview of the different tools that I use. So firstly, I use Kali Linux. This is a Linux distribution that comes pre-built with a few very key penetration testing tools. And then I use Nmap port scanner. It's an open source scanner to scan the ports and the service versions on my target. And then once I found out that, okay, it's running WordPress, right, I use WP scan, which is a more specific service security scanner for WordPress. And then finally, for vulnerability assessment, I use exploit, which is tied to this exploit database that hosts a lot of verified exploit scripts for known vulnerabilities. Okay, so during the exploitation process, you heard me talking about something like a reverse shell. So let me just briefly explain what happened here. Right, so I have my target on 10.0.8.6. Right, this is the WordPress target. And then I have my Kali on 10.0.8.1. So what happened here is that you can think of an exploit as a missile launcher, right? And your payload as a missile. So in order for the missile to do damage, right, it has to be delivered to the target. If not, your missile is just sitting with you. It's not going to do any damage, right? So in this case, the exploit is the missile launcher, and the payload is the one that actually does the damage, is the missile. So right here, my exploit script was the exploit, and my payload was that reverse shell that I executed on the target. And then once the payload was executed, what it does is that it connects back to my attacker machine on 10.0.8.1 with what we call an interactive shell session, which will allow me to execute code onto the target. So this reverse shell listener is running on port 1337. And then once everything connects, my attacker receives the reverse shell, and that's where I'm able to execute code and have some level of control over my target. So this is a brief overview of what happened when catching the shell. There are also different shell types that I didn't really show, which is like bind shell, reverse shell. Okay, so now I've completed my exploitation stage. So what next? I will move on to my post-exploitation, which you can either elevate your privileges from an unprivileged www-data to root user for maximum damage. You can even, remember there was a MySQL database, right? You can even try to access that to exfiltrate more data. And you can even modify and hide your logs for tracks. So this involves privilege escalation, which is a very key step in ethical hacking that I don't really have time to show, but it involves the whole exploitation stage again, but this time done locally onto the target. Okay, so thank you very much for listening to my very short demonstration. If you're interested, please connect with me on LinkedIn to learn more about offensive and defensive security. I'm a very technical person, so please feel free to just talk to me about anything technical or non-technical, right? And I would really also appreciate it if you can give me some feedback on my session, just so that I can improve future sessions. Thank you.